The headline said it all. $200 million cartel network crushed 5,000 arrests nationwide. But what they didn't say, at least not right away, is that this wasn't a victory lap. This was a warning. Operation Surge, launched in August 2024, wasn't just another bust. It was a coordinated, multi-agency campaign that pulled back the curtain on something far more dangerous than street-level crime. This wasn't about a few drug dealers. This was about transnational cartels embedded in American systems, operating like multinational corporations, manipulating.
If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Your feedback helps shape what we cover next, and you being here keeps the conversation going. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.
Infrastructure, exploiting technology, and infiltrating institutions at every level. At the center of it all, two names we've heard before, but never quite like this: the Sinaloa cartel and the Jalisco New Generation cartel, known as CJNG. These aren't just drug trafficking organizations anymore. Operation Surge confirmed what intelligence analysts and law enforcement insiders had feared for years. These cartels are functioning as hybrid criminal terrorist networks, with the scale, adaptability, and resources to destabilize national security from the inside. It started with a series of large-scale raids on shipping yards and industrial warehouses, fronts for synthetic opioid production facilities, the kinds of places you'd assume were storing car parts or consumer electronics, until agents breached the doors and uncovered fentanyl labs, pill presses, and chemical storage sites disguised as cleaning supply shipments. These labs weren't in remote jungle hideouts. They were in U.S. cities, in places you pass by without a second glance. The cartels weren't just importing drugs, they were manufacturing them on U.S. soil. And they weren't hiding. They didn't need to, because the systems meant to stop them had already been compromised. Operation Surge wasn't just about seizing product. It was about mapping the entire logistical backbone of these operations. And what it revealed was staggering. A multi-tiered network stretching across continents. Cartel logistics ran through ports in Europe and Asia. Chemical precursors were traced back to suppliers around the globe, and shipments were routed through major commercial hubs using fake manifests, shell corporations, and encrypted communication channels. The more law enforcement pulled on the thread, the more it became clear this wasn't just drug trafficking. It was organized infrastructure manipulation. The cartels were operating like Amazon or FedEx, only with deadlier cargo and far fewer rules. They were using drone surveillance to monitor law enforcement response times. They were tracking interdiction patterns and shifting routes in real time. They were using cyber intelligence tools, satellite imagery, and blockchain analysis to launder money, hide assets, and manage logistics. Everything was digital, distributed, and difficult to pin down. And then came the worst discovery. Inside ledger books, in intercepted communications, through wiretaps and internal audits, a pattern began to form. U.S. border agents, port officials, and even local law enforcement personnel were compromised, bought off, threatened, or turned willingly. What started as a drug operation quickly evolved into something far more dangerous, a breach in national security. With internal infiltration this widespread, the U.S. government made a decisive move. The Sinaloa cartel and CJNG were officially designated as foreign terrorist organizations. That reclassification wasn't just symbolic. It unlocked an entirely new legal arsenal. It meant the use of military-style tactics, expanded surveillance, cross-border intelligence partnerships, and preemptive strikes. Law enforcement could now operate with the full force of counterterrorism doctrine, including drone monitoring, international coordination, and asset freezes on a global scale. But even with that reclassification, and even with the thousands of arrests, officials were clear. This isn't a resolution. It's a shift in strategy. The war on drugs didn't end. It changed, because the cartels aren't centralized targets anymore. They're adaptive systems. When a route is closed, they create another. When a lab is destroyed, a new one is built elsewhere. Their networks are resilient by nature, decentralized, borderless, and rooted in digital infrastructure. They can reroute chemicals like supply chain experts. They can move money across borders without triggering alarms. And they know how to exploit every legal and logistical gap available. The people behind Operation Surge understood that enforcement alone would never be enough. You can't outmuscle a network that evolves faster than the institutions chasing it. So the new approach was clear. Shift from isolated drug enforcement toward intelligence-driven, homeland security-style campaign.
If you enjoyed this breakdown, Don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Your feedback helps shape what we cover next, and you being here keeps the conversation going. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.
Blend law enforcement with cyber intelligence. Fuse financial audits with global surveillance. Treat every front company, every port, every encrypted transaction as potential cartel infrastructure. And that meant tackling internal corruption head-on. The revelation that cartel operatives had infiltrated U.S. systems wasn't a rumor. It was documented, tracked, and confirmed. Officials found direct links between bribes and security lapses. They uncovered a pattern of manipulated inspections, overlooked shipments, and complicit oversight. In some regions, enforcement agencies had essentially become operational blind spots for the cartels. Fixing that meant tearing down parts of the system from within. It meant reevaluating who has access, who's making decisions, and how vulnerable those points of entry are. It meant asking hard questions about accountability, loyalty, and the integrity of institutions once assumed to be uncheckable. And it also meant preparing for what comes next, because the cartels will respond. They always do. And with billions in seized assets and thousands of members behind bars, the incentive to retaliate or restructure is stronger than ever. This isn't just a fight about territory or trafficking anymore. It's about influence, access, control. What Operation Surge exposed is a terrifying evolution in organized crime, not more violent, but more sophisticated. Cartels that no longer need to operate from the shadows because they found ways to blend into the fabric of legal commerce, digital finance, and public infrastructure. They don't need to hide drugs in cars anymore. They can move ingredients through ports in containers labeled industrial solvent. They don't need to store cash in hidden compartments. They're moving millions through crypto wallets and shell accounts that bounce between countries in seconds. They operate without uniforms, without flags, without borders. And that's the hardest enemy to fight, the one that looks like it belongs. So the takeaway from all this is that while Operation Surge was historic in scope, it was also just the beginning. The biggest mistake would be to think the job is done, because this kind of threat doesn't end, it mutates. If the institutions responsible for stopping it don't continue to evolve, they'll lose. And not just on the battlefield, but in the ports, in the spreadsheets, in the contracts, in the quiet places where influence is bought and power shifts hands without anyone noticing. This story wasn't just about a raid. It was about a reckoning. A realization that the systems we trust can be bent and sometimes broken from within. So if you're still watching, let's not let this story fade. Like, share, subscribe, and drop your thoughts in the comments, because the next phase of this war will be won or lost on whether people are paying attention. And if you think 5,000 arrests means the network is gone, you haven't been paying attention. Because Operation Surge didn't kill the beast, it exposed its anatomy. It showed us how deep the roots go, and just how far those branches stretch. And now that the surface layer has been ripped off, what's underneath is even more disturbing. A decentralized, invisible network that's not just surviving but evolving in real time. When you dig into what actually happened during this operation, you realize something chilling. The cartels weren't merely avoiding detection. They were playing the long game, building infrastructure that could withstand pressure, creating redundancies, embedding themselves into systems that were never designed to resist this kind of enemy. This wasn't the kind of operation you could wrap up with a few busts and a press conference. Because when the cartels set up shop inside the US, they didn't just build labs, they built entire operational pipelines, financial systems, shipping routes, chemical supply chains, communications protocols, and they designed it all to be replaceable. So even with $200 million in assets seized, the question remains, how much is still flowing that we don't even see? Operation Surge revealed that the cartels operate with the same logic as a global enterprise: decentralized logistics, risk management, market diversification, and technical innovation. If that sounds like business jargon, that's because it is. These are not gangs in the traditional sense. These are criminal corporations, and they use tools that match the times: AI to track enforcement trends, blockchain to obscure financial trails, deepfake tech to manipulate digital identities, end-to-end encrypted networks with redundancy servers set up in countries that won't cooperate with US agencies. Think about that. Law enforcement was fighting this using some of the same tools used in foreign intelligence ops. That's how high the stakes have gotten. That's how modern the threat is. And what really separates this operation from anything in the past is the acknowledgement that the cartels are no longer an external threat. They're internal. They've breached the walls. They've gotten in. The clearest evidence of that came from the corruption findings. Officials on the cartel payroll, insider access, leaked inspection schedules, altered port logs. This wasn't a one-off scandal. It was systemic. That's why the reclassification was so important. When the US officially labeled these cartels as foreign terrorist organizations, it wasn't a branding exercise. It was a strategic shift. It unlocked intelligence sharing across borders. It allowed surveillance without the same red tape. It gave authorities legal grounds to freeze international assets, deploy military-grade reconnaissance, and treat this not just as crime but as a threat to homeland security. And yet, even with all of that, officials are openly saying, we're still playing catch-up, because this is no longer about smuggling. It's not about drugs stashed in the trunk of a car or a backpack dropped at the border. That still exists, but it's ancient history compared to what Operation Surge revealed. The new cartel playbook is supply chain infiltration. It's digital camouflage. It's financial laundering that moves faster than regulators can blink. They've turned fentanyl production into a manufacturing process, hiding labs in industrial zones that look like any other logistics facility. They've embedded dirty money into legitimate business activity using shell companies, fake invoices, and perfectly legal trade routes to move funds globally. They've taken control of every step from chemical sourcing to production, to delivery, to laundering, and they've built fallback systems to keep the engine running even when parts get seized. That's what makes this so hard to kill. It's not a single structure, it's a web. Cut one line, and 3 more grow in its place. So where does that leave enforcement? It leaves them in a position that no one envies, trying to rebuild public trust in the very institutions that were compromised. Because when you find out that cartel operatives have been working inside security agencies, when you see evidence of bribery, blackmail, and long-term infiltration, it's not just a policing problem. It's a credibility crisis. That's why Operation Surge was just phase 1. Now, agencies are shifting from interdiction to internal audit. Vetting protocols are being rewritten. Background checks are being intensified. AI is being used to flag suspicious access patterns. Entire ports are being reviewed for signs of collusion. Because without internal security, external enforcement becomes meaningless. But even as all of that happens, the cartels are already adapting. We're seeing signs of movement toward bilateral operations in countries with low extradition rates, increased use of privacy coins in crypto laundering, more activity in virtual private marketplaces that exist outside of traditional surveillance tools. These organizations aren't going underground, they're going smarter. And they're patient. They understand that public attention fades, that after the headlines die down and the press briefings are over, most people move on. They're betting on that, because silence gives them time to rebuild. That's why Operation Surge, as massive as it was, has to be treated as a beginning, not an end. Because the moment we assume we've won, we lose. The only way to maintain pressure on an enemy like this is through continuous innovation, agile strategy, and relentless transparency. That means real-time intelligence sharing, joint international task forces, predictive surveillance, financial audits, and yes, it means public awareness. Because one of the most dangerous things about these networks is how invisible they are to everyday life. They don't look like criminals. They look like accountants, logistics managers, warehouse operators, crypto traders. They blend into legitimate structures so seamlessly that you don't realize what they're doing until it's too late. And that's exactly why this conversation can't stop here. The reality is unsettling. The biggest threat to national security may not come from a foreign army, but from a cartel that's already inside the system. That's not speculation. That's the conclusion law enforcement reached after dismantling a $200 million operation and arresting 5,000 people. So where does that leave us? It leaves us needing to stay engaged, because the system only evolves under pressure, under scrutiny, under collective awareness. This was more than a drug bust. It was a turning point. A moment where we saw the scale of the problem and the terrifying sophistication behind it. A moment when officials stopped calling it organized crime and started calling it a domestic infiltration crisis. Now the question is, will we keep paying attention? Because the cartels are counting on us to forget. So don't. So here's where things get uncomfortably real. If Operation Surge revealed anything, it's that the cartels are no longer some external threat waiting at the gate. They're not operating on the fringe, they've made it inside. Not just inside the country, but inside the infrastructure, the ports, the banking systems, and even the security agencies we trust to protect all of it. Think about what that means. The same institutions tasked with stopping illegal trafficking were at times knowingly helping it thrive. Not because of incompetence, because of corruption, because money moves people, and these cartels, they have more money than most of us can even imagine. And they use it strategically, not just to bribe individuals, but to invest in vulnerabilities. A port supervisor here, a customs official there, an inspector who's willing to look the other way once. That's all it takes. One weak link, one compromised node in the chain, because the rest, it's already built to scale. And once that chain's been exploited, once a fentanyl shipment gets waved through like it's packing insulation, it's not just a win for the cartels. It's a message that they can slip through undetected, that they've studied the system, found the cracks, and started managing risk like a business. That's what makes them so terrifying. These aren't chaotic criminals. They are operationally disciplined, technologically fluent, and strategically nimble. They don't just survive pressure, they adapt to it. Take crypto laundering, for example. The financial wing of these cartels is running like a fintech startup. Millions laundered through Bitcoin, split into shell accounts, reassembled in foreign markets, and cycled through legitimate digital platforms, traced only when it's too late if at all. And it's not just money. They're shipping networks. They've essentially cloned the logistics of global freight companies. Fake manifests, legitimate paperwork, clean containers, everything needed to look above board, because that's the goal, not to hide in shadows anymore, but to blend into normalcy. That's the real danger. The normalization of cartel operations inside legitimate systems. And you don't have to look any further than the manufacturing hubs discovered during Operation Surge. Fentanyl labs inside U.S. cities, hidden behind warehouse facades, registered under shell corporations. They were making synthetic opioids right here at home. No border crossing, no smuggling, just local production in industrial parks nobody questioned. Vacation as terrorist organizations mattered. It wasn't about rhetoric, it was about capability. Giving law enforcement the tools they actually need. Tools that let them operate on a global scale, share intelligence in real time, strike preemptively, and dismantle not just operations but entire ecosystems of support. And even with all that, the fight is uphill. Because the cartels aren't trying to beat the system. They're trying to become part of it. So what now? Now, it's about sustaining the momentum. About keeping the spotlight on an enemy that thrives in silence. It's about making sure the institutions that were compromised are held accountable and rebuilt stronger. And it's about recognizing that this isn't just a criminal issue. It's a national security imperative. Operation Surge wasn't the end of anything. It was the start of something very real and very long. If you're still watching, you already know how deep this goes. So do something with that. Hit like, subscribe, drop your thoughts in the comments because this fight is happening in plain sight, and ignoring it only makes it stronger. Thanks so much for watching. If you made it all the way to the end, you're officially part of the small percentage of people who don't just click away, and that means a lot. Before you go, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me your thoughts, your ideas, or even what you'd like to see next. I read every single one of them, and your feedback genuinely shapes the direction of this channel. If you enjoyed the video, tap that like button, it tells YouTube this content is worth sharing. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next upload. We've got more exciting videos coming, and trust me, you'll want to be here for them. This channel is just getting started, and your support helps it grow faster than you realize. Thank you again for spending a part of your day here with me. Stay curious, stay motivated, and as always, take care of yourself. Until next time, I'll see you in the next video.